All right, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the 69th meeting of the Good Leadership Breakfast.
Goodness pays because goodness grows. So one of the things that we do here is we're very, very careful about who we select as our speakers. When I first met Lindsay, I just was overwhelmed at the spark that she had and the energy she carried into our office, and has goals that I think are really compelling that we should listen to. So without any further ado, please welcome our speaker, Lindsay Riley.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Lindsay Riley, and as Paul mentioned, he called me back last December and asked if I'd be interested in speaking. And at the time, I was what I found out to be 2 days away from giving birth to my second kid. So at that point, I heard something in August of next year. I was like, yeah, I'll do anything. Like, it's fine. I can't take another decision. But I was surprised to hear from him and feeling a little bit like I'm not cool enough to be here talking to you guys, but I'm really honored to be here and to share my story with you all, so thank you for being here as well. So growing up, some people might have called me an overachiever, and not because I perfectly excelled at everything that I did, but because I occupied 6 or 7 personas at once, all with Olympic intensity devoted to them. I was the nerd in science class who asked the teacher for more homework and tests. Yeah, that girl. I was the artist who spent hours and hours each week practicing my violin or chasing the grace of ballerinas. I was the athlete who took competitive swimming as seriously as Katie Ledecky. And I even flexed my leadership muscles when I became the student council president, and I presided over issues like, should we or shouldn't we have a talent show this year? So I'd like to think that the pinnacle of my life is yet to be achieved, but it'd be impossible not to acknowledge that I might have peaked in early 2001 when I was in the 6th grade. I was a powerful type A 12-year-old from the Arizona desert with my eyes set on greatness. A train just beginning to build momentum. But over time, I could feel that engine slowing. I was tired all the time, I was physically bruised, and just didn't feel well. Paler than average, which for me is ghostly white. And after weeks of losing steam, that train finally derailed, and all my high-minded plans for the future spilled to the ground and were ruined in the face of a more severe immediate challenge. I found myself not fighting for a future filled with Olympic dreams or point shoes, but simply in a battle for the next day, fighting against a life-threatening illness. But for me, this story has a happy ending. I stand before you a healthy adult, a wife, and a mother of 2 beautiful children. With the help of an incredible medical team, a community that rallied behind me, and a family who dropped everything to support me, I found triumph over disease. But the journey was arduous, and it left a permanent mark on my life. See, a child who faces death at such an impressionable age is given an intimate look at the concept of our own human mortality, and it's impossible to leave that experience the same kid that you once were. And while there are times when darkness clouded my world, my journey is also filled with stories of warmth and compassion and hope. It's from this experience that I learned what true goodness is. That true goodness isn't found in the number of awards you win or how great your grades are, how awesome your job title is. That true goodness is in how you conduct yourself in the face of a challenge and how you rise to an occasion to serve others. Goodness is in realizing that every person has a unique role to play and figuring out how we can utilize each other to better serve humankind. There are times where my illness really seems like a curse, but I do really consider myself lucky in so many ways. One of those ways is to have witnessed the impact that goodness and leadership can have on the lives of those around you. But this isn't a story about individual triumph over a momentary struggle. I'm not here to talk to you about the importance of grit when you're faced with a challenge. Of no doubt, dogged determination and perseverance are both critical to accomplishing one's goals. But there are plenty of TED Talks, motivational speeches, and other books out there that can talk to this topic more eloquently than I can. In truth, I have found, my experience has shown me that goodness is equally, if not more important than grit. For there really are no self-made successes in this world, and to label yourself as such is to ignore the important roles that goodness and good people have played in your life. That was certainly true for me as a kid. It's true in my career development now, and it's something that I hope to be for others in the future. But for now, let's go back and let's take a look at how my story unfolded. In the summer of 2001, I was diagnosed with a life-threatening blood disorder called aplastic anemia. And aplastic anemia is essentially a failure of the bone marrow to produce any life-sustaining cells. What that means is there's no more oxygen-carrying red blood cells, no more infection-fighting white blood cells, and no more blood-clotting platelets. This explained why I was tired all the time, why I was physically bruised, and just didn't really feel well either. There are several different ways to treat this disease and to kickstart the body into creating new cells again. One of the best options is called a bone marrow transplant. Just like any other organ transplant, a bone marrow transplant requires a donor whose cells match the recipient's close enough that the body doesn't tag their cells as foreign and start attacking. I mentioned earlier that I consider myself lucky in many ways. And one of those ways is that one of my two brothers was actually an identical match to me and was able to be my donor, which made a bone marrow transplant the best option and potentially a curative treatment for me. So in late summer of 2001, just as my friends were all getting ready to go to 7th grade, my mom and we packed our bags and moved to Tucson, Arizona to prepare for my treatment. My dad and my brothers stayed back home in Phoenix. I won't dwell on the difficulties of my experience there, but on August 31st, 2001, I received my life-saving treatment. My medical team and my family were very quick to call this my new birthday, and it's still a day that we celebrate every year. Within a month, I was discharged from the hospital and on my way to recovery, and within 2 months, I was back home in Phoenix. I'm lucky again to have had a relatively fast recovery, free of complications, which is in part due to advances in science and medicine, but more likely, it's attributed to the outpouring of support that I received from family, friends, community, and even perfect strangers. The Child Life volunteers, my medical team, other families in the hospital, and the organizations like the Make-A-Wish Foundation were even more important to me on my road to recovery. Within a year, I was considered fully recovered, and no doubt had a different perspective on life than I had before. I'd been so moved by the devoted acts of good that I witnessed while a patient in the hospital. The medical professionals, doctors, nurses, social workers proved to be inspirational on every level. They were intelligent, they were caring, committed, and compassionate as well. But it's not just members of my healthcare team that were inspirational and inspired me to carry on. The Make-A-Wish Foundation supported my family and gave us a reprieve from the struggle as well. My community back in Phoenix hosted fundraisers and blood drives and brought meals for my family while they were away. Witnessing this outpouring of support showed me that when people pursue goodness, lives change. And with this concept in the forefront of my mind, I immediately began identifying ways that I could live out the example of goodness that had been before me. I started immediately trying to volunteer in organizations that had helped me during my time of struggle. I spent time with my local Make-A-Wish chapter, volunteering at local events or fundraisers, and was eventually asked to sit on their board for the Kids for Wish Kids program. I started spending hours each week in the bone marrow transplant ward at Phoenix Children's Hospital, in the playroom, and at other children's hospitals throughout the years as well. And before high school, I had decided that I wanted to become a pediatric hematologist-oncologist, just like the doctors who had helped me. For the next decade, I chased the goodness that I had seen in others and tried to fulfill the high standards that they had set. Throughout college, I pursued a resume that I thought would be worthy of getting into medical school. I graduated college in 3 years, I got my emergency medical technician license, and I worked in a prestigious research lab at my university. Not to mention also keeping up with my extracurricular activities, my leadership roles, my Greek life, and volunteering as well. I think it's safe to say that my overachiever tendencies also gained a full recovery. After graduating college, I took a job in clinical research where I could marry my clinical EMT skills with my love of unanswered questions. I studied for the MCAT and started my medical school applications, and I was ever ready to show admissions committees and myself that I was destined to become a doctor. But in the back of my mind, I started realizing how much I loved my job, and I started questioning whether or not this was the right path for me. Was this what I was destined to do, I asked, given my history and my path until now? Or was I putting meaning into a situation and forcing my future to make sense of my past? Despite these questions, I pushed on. I applied to medical school and invested in myself and my career as well. Eventually, I was offered a job in Minneapolis with Medtronic, an offer that I accepted, and my husband and I moved to the land of 10,000 frozen lakes. I was proud to have been offered this position and excited to see where it may lead, but I still fundamentally believed that my role to making a difference in this world would be as a physician. I was chasing what I had believed would be my destiny, the best and perhaps the only way for me to live a life dedicated to serving others. Becoming a physician certainly felt like the thing that I should do. It felt like the accumulation of my experiences, my academic achievements, my extracurricular activities had built this unstoppable momentum towards this goal. There were decades of self-made pressure sitting on my shoulders, pushing me forward, even if my heartstrings were pulling me in a different direction. And then one day, it hit me. That unconscious hesitation, once hidden in the depths of my mind, bubbled to the surface. And I asked myself, can choosing what we want to do bring about more goodness in this world than what we think we should do? I had always assumed my role would be a physician, but honestly, it never felt quite good, and I struggled a lot of the way on that path. And I realized, how could I possibly do good for others if I don't first feel good about what I'm doing? With Medtronic, I was connected to the work that I was doing, and I was inspired by the company's mission to help their patients and create technologies that alleviate pain, restore health, extend life. I realized that I could do good work without the uphill battle that had plagued much of my pre-med life, and that success in a business setting and service to a noble cause are not mutually exclusive ideas, and that companies are made up of lots of people doing good work, and they can make a difference in this world too. So after intense deliberation, I withdrew my med school applications, all 32 of them. And what I had thought would be a nerve-wracking decision actually brought me profound peace. Don't get me wrong, I still questioned whether or not I was making a huge mistake, and maybe I still am. But for the first time, it felt like a piece of the puzzle had snapped into place. I stopped forcing something, stopped trying to plan for the next right 1,000 decisions, and just focused on the next one, and started letting things happen and focusing on the next right decision. In turn, I invested in myself and in new pursuits at Medtronic, always pushing for new challenges, new assignments, and new learnings. And what I found is that by pursuing excellence in even the most mundane of tasks at times, more and more projects with bigger impacts were at my fingertips. And I was gaining recognition from executives that I wasn't sure ever even knew my name before. When I was able to connect the work with goodness, it was more fun than I thought it could be. I was able to travel and had the flexibility to start a family, which are both important things for my personal development as well. My career development has never followed a perfect linear path. It's always taken different turns and curves. I've always managed to find what it is I like about the current job I'm doing and do more of that. Some of the best advice I received early on in my career is to align yourself with good people, leaders who are going to take you somewhere. And looking back, I feel that this is a fundamental truth in career development, that working with good people, leaders, mentors, colleagues, is almost more important than the work that you will do. Because when you work with good leaders who value their position in lifting up their teams, they will move mountains to give you the opportunities that you want, and you in turn will devote even better excellence in your performance with them. I believe the world needs people that are devoted to doing good, but too often we assign extraordinary circumstances to goodness and expect that anybody can meet this impossible standard. I believe this is why it seems that goodness is waning in the world. We equate goodness with high stature, high achievement, and near miracles, and then we wonder why it isn't a more frequent occurrence in our life. In this world with the constant stream of information, it's understandable why we neglect the good that occurs in our lives. But I believe you don't have to look that hard to realize that goodness likely surrounds you every single day. It isn't always a noble beacon or a shining, bright act. Sometimes it's in the small things. Maybe it's a teammate who steps in and asks you, "How can I help?" when you seem to be overloaded or overallocated with work. Maybe it's your employee who takes initiative, who goes above and beyond your expectations of them. Maybe it's staying up late with your wife, practicing her speech over and over and over again. Or maybe it's just driving a friend to the airport so they can save a bit of cash. My point here is that goodness has different layers and different amplitudes. Acts of goodness have a ripple effect in the universe, with the larger and larger circles starting to collide with smaller ones. And for this reason, any act of goodness is worth it, for it's impossible to know the downstream impact that that act will have. I've shared with you today how the goodness of others has had an important impact on my life. Without the support and devoted service of others, I wouldn't be standing on this stage today. And without following those feelings of good for myself that led me down a different path than I had envisioned, I wouldn't have the lifestyle, the career, or the family that I have today. And for me, that's reason enough to be thankful for the guiding influence that goodness has played. So I challenge you today to follow goodness, to ride the wave of goodness when it approaches you in your life. Don't duck it. I want you to follow the current and see where it takes you. I want you to say yes to the things that you know are good, to the things that show you joy. Because goodness is about serving yourself and others, doesn't require martyrdom. Goodness is about stepping up in the face of a challenge for yourself or for others. I had so many people do this for me, and now it's my turn to pay that back, and I invite you all to join me. Thank you.
So when you and I were getting to know each other, you talked a lot about how strong your family was, even before they rallied around you. I'm curious to find out now that you have your own family, so how are you sort of dealing with this work-life thing that we talk about when you got 2 working parents and 2 young kids?
Yeah, it's, I would say, a day-to-day struggle sometimes, but I try to always strive for balance. And what I mean by that is that, one day to the next day, or even hour to hour sometimes, may not be perfectly balanced. There may be days where work is more my focus, another day where maybe family is more my focus, but when you look at it over the long term, you can say, okay, things kind of balance out that way. So one of the biggest ways I'm really trying to stay balanced is to take it easy on myself even. And
Can
not
you do that?
You can ask my husband.
Yeah, okay.
It's a work in progress. But just try to remember, that each thing has kind of its own time, and it's not necessarily balancing the day-to-day or hour-to-hour, like I said, but that overall holistically trying to keep things balanced. So.
Well, there's a whole room full of people who think that 7Fs thing helps.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Right. So I know enough about your condition to know that it's extremely rare to have someone in your family who's a match. So what's your relationship like with your brother now?
Yeah. We have always been really close, both my brothers. I have an older brother and a younger brother, and my relationship with each of them is slightly different, but we've always been very tight-knit and a very tight-knit family and very close. And so honestly, I would say that it's no different today than it was then. And both my brothers at the time when I was sick were both eager to be the ones that matched, and my little brother, I think, was actually sort of mad that it wasn't him that matched.
Yeah, well, I can imagine that, yeah.
Which is really sweet, so I appreciate it, but no, I think we both, I'm really close with both my brothers. We have just a really good friendship and sibling relationship too, so I am super fortunate to have them in my life too.
Okay, so in our work with executives, we do this thing called personal visioning, where we look 7 years back in our lives. And so I'm 55. I would look 7 years back and then 7 years ahead to 62. Where were you? What was going on in your life 7 years ago?
Yeah, 7 years ago.
So how old are you now?
29.
29, so 22.
Yeah. I was 1 year out of college, and I was working in my first job. Where I was actually working 2 jobs and studying for the MCAT and getting ready to apply to med school. So I had my hands really full at that point in time too. But you know, I was actually looking at different opportunities out there for my career. Again, I mentioned that I started really enjoying research and liking what I did with research. But the balance and the culture in this company and where I was doing the research wasn't exactly what I was looking for. And so I had my eyes open to some other opportunities that were out there, and I was just kind of trying to find where my place was and figure that out. So I was, again, like full force med school about 7 years ago.
And just out of college,
Yeah.
So that's something familiar to a lot of the people here.
Yeah, yeah.
So you mentioned that you were afraid of making the mistake when you decided not to go to med school. So in the last 7 years, have there been any other mistakes you'd think about?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think when you try, like I mentioned, that my philosophy is kind of trying not to plan for the next 1,000 decisions that are out there and just taking it one step at a time and just trying to make the next right decision and then take the next right decision and just focus on that. And when you do that, it's really hard to think that any of your decisions have really been a mistake because you're kind of charting the course as you go. And so I sort of believe that all of these opportunities, whether they were expected or unexpected, or they turned out the way I wanted or they didn't, it's all part of a process. And I think just not putting that pressure on yourself to know all the answers right up front and then look back and say, oh, that was a mistake, I shouldn't have done it that way. If you just kind of take it one step at a time, you realize that this is more a journey than it is a path that you're checking the boxes towards.
I think that's a good advice for those of us seasoned leaders too, yeah. Okay, so 7 years from now, where do you think you'll be?
God, I get this question all the time, and I never have a good answer for it.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's all good. I think, again, just trying to take things one decision at a time and one step at a time. I know what I want to be, and that's a leader. And I think that can take any number of different forms. It can be in a career, different leadership tracks and different leadership positions, or in your personal life and being a leader in the community or with your family even. So I think I know like my gold North Star is being a good leader, but I think that the definition of what that is going to be kind of contextual based on that time.
So you'd be 36, does that sound old?
You know what? It actually doesn't. It actually doesn't.
Good answer.
Yeah.
So you talked about loving travel and something you and your husband share. What's next on the travel list?
Yeah. So we have this board in our house where we mark off on the map where places we want to go, and I think there's more places that we want to go than places we've been. So maybe someday when we're not paying for daycare, we can figure that out.
Yeah, it's going to be a while.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, I would love, there's so many places in Europe that I would love to go to. I've been to a couple different countries there, but there's so much history in Europe that has just so neat to see and experience. I want to go to Scandinavia. I'm really in this would love to go to Japan and kind of Asia kick right now too. I think there's tons of different places I want to go.
Well, working with Medtronic, you'll probably get to go to some of those places.
Yeah, we'll see.
Absolutely. Well, you know what? Thank you so much for making your time available to us.
Thank you.
Let's give it up for Lindsay Riley.